For thousands of years, the world's most powerful empires fell into the same deadly trap. They advanced across the Iranian plateau with their armies assembled and their weapons ready, convinced that this ancient civilization could be erased from history forever. Time and time again, they believed Iran's story was about to end, yet time and time again, they were proven wrong. The disciplined Macedonian phalanxes of Alexander the Great marched across these lands. The formidable legions of Rome pushed toward its frontiers. Arab armies arrived carrying a banner of a new faith. Then came the fierce Mongol horsemen of Genghis Khan, sweeping through the region and leaving behind cities in ruins and a trail of devastation. Most nations would have disappeared forever after enduring so many devastating blows. They would have gradually faded into the vast cultural and historical currents of time, much like the Babylonians, the Hittites, and the Assyrians. Yet Iran followed a very different path. But with Iran, something far more remarkable happened. Again and again, despite defeats on the battlefield, the fall of their capitals, and long periods of foreign occupation, the Iranian people accomplished what few civilizations ever could. Instead of being erased by their conquerors, they gradually absorbed them into their own cultural world. Within just a few generations, many of those once feared conquerors began speaking Persian, embracing Persian culture, constructing buildings in the Persian style, adopting its administrative systems, and even dressing in local fashions. Time and again, rather than being transformed by the invaders, Iran managed to transform those who had come to rule it, absorbing both foreign empires and nomadic peoples into its enduring civilization. How has Iran, from the ancient world to the modern era, consistently compelled every major global power to take it seriously? How did its people manage to preserve their identity through centuries of conquest and upheaval? And perhaps most intriguingly, how did the civilization once known to the world as Great Persia, a nation with more than 5,000 years of history, ultimately choose to set aside its famous name and become known internationally as Iran? This is the story of a nation that helped shape humanity's understanding of time, transformed political conflict into a cosmic struggle between light and darkness, and discovered how temporary defeats could become the path to lasting survival. To truly appreciate the depth of this civilization, we must travel far back into the ancient world. For generations, the Western world has viewed Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt as the birthplaces of civilization.
Iran, meanwhile, has often been treated as a secondary player in that grand narrative. But that view fails to capture the full picture. Across the Iranian plateau, civilization evolved in its own unique way, laying foundations that would influence the ancient world for thousands of years.
50,000 years ago, these lands were inhabited by Neanderthals, who were eventually replaced by Cro-Magnons around 36,000 years ago. But the true transformation came much later.
Across the Iranian plateau, archaeologists have uncovered evidence of remarkably advanced settlements, including the ancient culture of Giroft and the impressive ziggurats of early urban societies, some dating back 6,000 to 7,000 years. Ceramic vessels from the 4th millennium before Christ irrefutably prove one of the oldest civilizations on the planet evolved right here, standing shoulder to shoulder with Mesopotamia and China.
The first great political power to emerge on these lands was Elam, a kingdom in what is now southwestern Iran, with its capital at the ancient city of Susa.
The Elamites grew into a formidable force, and by the 3rd millennium BCE, they had become one of the dominant powers of the region, frequently challenging and influencing the powerful Sumerian city-states of Mesopotamia.
But the most remarkable development came in the 23rd century BCE, when the Akkadian king Naram-Sin clashed with Elam. What followed was far more significant than a typical military confrontation. Instead of ending in a simple ceasefire, the two sides formalized their relationship through a written treaty. The agreement recognized Elam's autonomy while requiring it to coordinate its policies and interests with those of the Akkadian Empire. Consider what that means for a moment. This is widely regarded as one of the earliest recorded international treaties in human history. Long before modern states and diplomats existed, the Iranian plateau was already playing a role in the birth of international diplomacy. Long before modern states and diplomats existed, the Iranian plateau was already playing a role in the birth of international diplomacy. The people we now identify as Iranians arrived later in history. Between roughly the 20th and 15th centuries BCE, waves of nomadic tribes began moving southward onto the Iranian plateau. They came from the vast steppes of Central Asia and regions near the Caucasus, gradually settling across this rugged and mountainous land. They were part of the broader Indo-European family of peoples, specifically the Indo-Iranian branch. Remarkably, their ancient tongue shared a common origin with languages such as Latin and Greek, and is ultimately connected to many of the modern languages spoken across Europe today, including English and Spanish. Upon settling in these lands, they began identifying themselves as Aryans, a term meaning noble, and named their new homeland Aryanum Veja, the land of the Aryans. Over time, this ancient designation gradually evolved and was simplified through centuries of linguistic change into the name we now know as Iran. They gradually blended with the older Elamite culture and formed powerful tribal confederations, the most notable of which later developed into the Medes and the Persians. It was in these rugged mountains and unforgiving deserts that a uniquely Iranian strength began to take shape. Their greatest weapon was not chariots or advanced archery, but something far more enduring, an ideology that shaped identity and survival. Long before the rise of Christianity and Islam, a transformative belief system emerged on the Iranian plateau that profoundly reshaped human thought: Zoroastrianism. For the ancient Iranians, existence was far more than a random sequence of events or a repetitive cycle of changing seasons. The universe was understood as a vast battleground, shaped by an uncompromising struggle between Ahura Mazda, the supreme deity of light, truth, and order, and Angra Mainyu, the opposing force embodying deception, chaos, and darkness. Most significantly, Zoroastrianism gave structure to this concept of evil, defining it not only as a cosmic force, but also as something that actively operates within the world. The domain of darkness was often associated with the vast nomadic regions of Eurasia, from where destructive raids frequently originated. In contrast, to be Iranian was to be seen as a defender of light, a warrior aligned with order and truth. Their culture, poetry, and systems of governance were deeply shaped by the idea of actively supporting and upholding the forces of good. This worldview created a remarkable sense of unity across the society. But Zoroastrianism introduced an even more profound idea. It was among the first traditions in history to declare that time is not cyclical, but linear. In this view, the world has a clear beginning and an ultimate end: creation, followed by an inevitable final confrontation between light and darkness, culminating in purification through fire and a final judgment. But how did such a powerful idea spread so widely?
A key moment came in the 6th century BCE when the Persians conquered Babylon and freed the Jewish population from captivity there. Judea remained under Persian rule for about 2 centuries. During this long period of close contact, Jewish thought absorbed key Zoroastrian ideas, such as linear time, end times expectation, and final judgment. These concepts later influenced the development of Christianity and Islam.
Prominent philosophers, including Friedrich Nietzsche, have been seen as acknowledging that Iran played a crucial role in shaping the idea of linear time, the very framework through which we still understand history today. The first major state of the early Iranian peoples was Media, which emerged around 670 BCE.
The Median kingdom didn't endure for very long, but it achieved a remarkable feat by helping bring down the powerful Assyrian Empire. However, its dominance was eventually overtaken by its own kin, the Persians. Around 550 BCE, Cyrus the Great, who had both Median and Persian heritage, united the two related peoples, bringing together the Persian tribes and the Medes under a single rule. From this union, he began to establish what historians later call the Achaemenid Empire, often described as the first superpower of the ancient world. Cyrus set himself apart from earlier conquerors. In his campaigns across Lydia, the Greek city-states of Asia Minor, and Babylon, he refrained from destroying temples and did not enslave the defeated populations, choosing instead a more restrained form of rule. He built an empire founded on a principle of respect and relative tolerance. His successor, Darius I, went on to expand its boundaries from Egypt all the way to the Indus Valley. At its height, nearly 50 million people, roughly half of the world's population at the time, lived under Persian rule. Darius reorganized the empire into about 20 administrative provinces known as satrapies, implemented a standardized taxation system, introduced gold coinage called darics, and established an extensive road network that supported one of the fastest imperial postal systems of its time. Yet, history is unforgiving when it comes to vulnerability. In an effort to safeguard his empire from the pressures of nomadic forces, Cyrus the Great led a campaign into Central Asia against the Massagetæ tribe. It was there that the great emperor ultimately met his fate. The confrontation was fiercely brutal, ending in the destruction of much of the Persian army. According to Herodotus, the Massagetae queen Tamiris, driven by vengeance for the death of her son, commanded her warriors to locate Cyrus's body after the battle. Once it was recovered, she is said to have severed his head and plunged it into a bag filled with blood, declaring that he had craved violence and would now be sated with it. Now drink your fill. Yet, even after this brutal episode, the empire did not collapse. It endured and continued to expand. Modern popular narratives often present the Greco-Persian Wars, including the story of the 300 Spartans, as a decisive blow that broke Persian power. But this reflects a simplified Western interpretation, rather than the full historical picture. While the Greek city-states did succeed in defending their independence, the Persian Empire itself remained a dominant force for many years afterward. For the vast Achaemenid Empire, the loss of a few peripheral cities was little more than a minor irritation. The Persians quickly shifted strategy, instead of relying on direct confrontation. They began using diplomacy and financial influence, supporting first Athens and later Sparta to fuel rivalries among the Greek city-states. In the end, by 387 BCE, the weary Greeks were compelled to accept a humiliating peace settlement dictated by the Persian king Artaxerxes. What the Persians could not achieve through sheer military force, they often secured through wealth and influence. In many ways, Persia ended up holding sway over Greek affairs without ever needing to conquer them outright.
However, the real problem emerged later. As the Achaemenid Empire expanded to an enormous scale, its central authority struggled to effectively govern a vast mosaic of peoples and regions. This internal strain created an opening that a young and ambitious Macedonian ruler would eventually exploit.
In 330 BCE, Alexander the Great's Macedonian forces decisively defeated the Persian army, bringing down the Achaemenid power structure.
He went on to set fire to the grand palace of Persepolis, a symbolic moment that made it seem as if Iran's long imperial history had come to an end. In the aftermath, the Seleucid kingdom emerged from the ruins of the Achaemenid world, ruled by the Macedonian Greeks. Yet it was precisely at this point of apparent collapse that the Iranian historical resilience began to assert itself once again.
Eastern traditions gradually began to absorb their Western conquerors. Even Alexander the Great himself adopted elements of Persian culture, including local dress and court customs. The policy of Hellenization struggled to take root against the deeply entrenched Iranian worldview. By the 3rd century BCE, the Parthians, an Indo-Iranian people, rose to power, expelled the Greek rulers, and established the Parthian Empire. The Parthian ruler Mithridates I declared himself King of Kings, presenting his dynasty as the rightful successor to the Achaemenids. For nearly 5 centuries, the Parthians, masters of fast-moving cavalry and the famed Parthian shot, held their ground even against the Roman Empire, inflicting severe defeats on Roman legions across the Middle East. Then, in 224 CE, a new era of revival began with the rise of the Sassanid dynasty. Originating from Persis, the ancestral homeland of the early Persians, they established a strongly centralized empire in which Zoroastrianism was elevated to the status of official state ideology. Society was organized into a rigid hierarchy of classes: priests, warriors, administrators, and commoners, creating a structured system that aimed to balance order with merit-based advancement. The Sassanid Empire fought exhausting wars for nearly 4 centuries, first against Rome and later against Byzantium, over control of strategic regions like Mesopotamia and the Caucasus. These continuous conflicts placed a severe strain on Iran's resources and manpower. By the mid-7th century CE, the Sassanid state had become a weakened giant, drained by endless warfare and internal exhaustion. A new and unprecedented power emerging from the deserts of the Arabian Peninsula seized this moment of weakness: the Arab Caliphate. By 651 CE, the Persian capital had fallen, and the last Sassanid ruler was killed, marking the end of the dynasty. With that collapse, the whole of Iran came under Arab control, and a new political era began under the rising Umayyad Caliphate. The Arabs introduced a new faith, Islam, along with a new linguistic and cultural framework. Over time, Zoroastrianism, the spiritual foundation of Iranian identity for centuries, began to decline. For most other societies, such a transformation would have meant a complete loss of cultural identity, much like what is often said to have happened in places such as Egypt or Syria, where Arabization became deeply rooted and lasting. But once again, the Persians managed to reverse the expected outcome. Although several Arab rulers attempted to sever Iran from its cultural foundations, military defeat did not translate into cultural disappearance. Instead, the Iranians gradually reasserted themselves through influence and knowledge. Under the Abbasid Caliphate in particular, Persian administrators, scholars, and poets became essential to the functioning of the state. Arab rulers increasingly adopted Persian systems of governance and court organization. Far from fading away, the Persian language not only survived, but continued to evolve and maintain its significance. They did not stop at conquest alone. After Genghis Khan's arrival from the Central Asian steppes in 1220, a new wave of destruction swept across Iran. The Mongols did not merely occupy cities, they devastated them, massacring entire populations and erasing centuries-old irrigation systems that had sustained civilizations for generations.
It seemed as though Iran might be reduced to little more than a grazing ground for nomadic powers. Yet history took an unexpected turn when Hulagu Khan, a grandson of Genghis Khan, established the Mongol Ilkhanate in the region. Instead of simply destroying what remained, these once harsh steppe conquerors gradually transformed. They adopted Islam, embraced Persian as the language of administration, and began patronizing grand Persian-style architecture, including the iconic blue-domed mosques, while actively supporting local scholars and poets. By the close of the 14th century, the cycle of destruction and rebirth had repeated itself once again in Iranian history. Timur's forces swept into these regions with devastating intensity, leaving behind scenes of immense destruction. In some accounts, they were said to build grim towers from the severed heads of their enemies. Yet even amid this brutality, Timur himself remained deeply influenced by Persian civilization. He brought skilled Iranian artisans to his capital, recognizing their artistic mastery. His successors, the Timurids, went on to ignite a remarkable Persian cultural revival, transforming their courts into vibrant centers of poetry, architecture, and the exquisite art of miniature painting. For nearly 3 centuries, Iran became a vast arena where political authority was often held by Mongol and Turkic rulers. Yet once these conquerors established themselves on the Iranian throne, something remarkable occurred. Within a few generations, they were gradually absorbed into Persian identity. Rather than erasing the culture they ruled, they themselves were reshaped by it. The deep cultural framework of Iran effectively redefined its own rulers. Out of the long and turbulent 300-year period of tribal invasions and shifting dynasties, a leader named Shah Ismail emerged in 1501. He succeeded in reuniting the fractured land and established the Safavid state. It was under the Safavids that Shia Islam was declared the official religion of Iran, marking a turning point that set the country apart both culturally and politically from the predominantly Sunni world, particularly the Ottoman Empire. Iran once again reasserted its distinct and resilient identity. By the 19th century, under the Qajar dynasty of Turkic origin, the country entered a period of deep instability. A series of devastating wars with the Russian Empire resulted in the permanent loss of vast territories, including present-day Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. By the early 20th century, on the eve of the First World War, Iran had effectively become a strategic chessboard for the Great Game, the geopolitical rivalry between the British and Russian empires for influence in the region. The country was gradually divided into competing spheres of influence, with British interests controlling Iranian oil resources, while Russian forces maintained a strong presence in the north. In later years, the Soviet Union even attempted to establish a communist-backed republic in northern Iran, further tightening the pressure of foreign dominance. Under the weight of these imperial rivalries, Iran found itself constrained and weakened. Yet Iran's historical pattern of adaptation persisted. In 1925, Reza Shah Pahlavi rose to power following a military coup. He embarked on an ambitious and strict program of modernization and industrial development, aiming to centralize authority and reshape the country along a more modern state model. In 1935, he took a decision that reverberated through international diplomacy. For centuries, much of the Western world had referred to the country as Persia, a name derived from the ancient Greek term for the region of Pars, and often associated in Europe with exotic imagery, mythology, and a sense of antiquity. Reza Shah rejected this external label,
and issued an official instruction to foreign governments and diplomatic missions. He requested that the country henceforth be addressed by its historic endonym, Iran, a name rooted in centuries of indigenous usage, meaning the land of the Aryans. This shift was more than a simple change in terminology. It signaled a broader assertion of national identity and sovereignty on the global stage. It was a declaration of intent. Iran was not to be seen as an exotic dependency, but as a modern, powerful state with deep historical roots, one that demanded recognition and respect. Iranian history is often marked by abrupt and decisive turns, and the 20th century was no exception. Positioned on the global geopolitical chessboard, the country became entangled in the competing interests of major world powers. Years of internal unrest, political instability, and foreign intervention eventually culminated in the Islamic Revolution of 1979. The monarchy was overthrown, and Iran was transformed into a theocratic republic, leading to a dramatic rupture in its relations with the Western world. And today, we are left with a striking historical paradox. In the modern imagination, two overlapping identities seem to exist at once. The name Iran often evokes images of geopolitical tension, sanctions, conflict, and breaking news headlines. Yet the word Persia has never truly disappeared. Instead, it continues to survive in culture, memory, and symbolism, carrying associations of an ancient civilization, art, poetry, and empire that still fascinates the world. It has taken on a romantic, almost legendary quality. Persia evokes images of faded imperial glory, intricate poetry, mythic tales, flying carpets, and kingdoms drawn from folklore. Two names, one country, and an ongoing tension over how its identity is perceived and remembered. Across more than 5 millennia of history, this civilization appears to have refined a unique form of cultural resilience. Faced with Macedonian, Arab, or Mongol invasions, it did not simply vanish. Instead, it often outlasted its conquerors, gradually reshaping and absorbing them into its own enduring cultural framework. They stood at the very roots of civilization, shaping the early frameworks of human thought and even redefining how time itself is understood. Yet perhaps their most profound struggle is not buried in the past, but unfolding in the present. Because behind the simplicity of a nation's name lies an unseen, silent conflict, one that is rarely visible but constantly present. It is the struggle between memory and modernity, between ancient identity and present reality, and between how a people see themselves and how the world chooses to define them.